So thanks everybody. Welcome to Down to Earth with Harriet Kemick. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I want to thank you so much for being part of our broadcast this morning and to talk about the issues that matter. It's kind of, I'm trying to get out of the funk of accepting that it's winter. See, here in Michigan, we have two seasons. We have winter and construction. Winter and construction. I kid you not. We don't really see spring and summer. It's kind of like it just goes, and then you see like a few days when it feels spring-like, and then boom, next thing you know, it's hot, and then after that it just gets rainy, and then you have like in July maybe 2 intense weeks of heat, and then before you know it, there you are again, and it starts getting cool, and then you're like, wow, well, I guess summer passed a whole 2 weeks later, and then before you know it, it's all construction. It's either winter or construction. Those are the only two seasons that we tend to have here in Michigan. So I'm not really happy this morning because I had to wake up to see snow. Not fun. And it was falling. I mean, it was coming down in droves out of the sky. Like the sky literally rained snow this morning. And I'm not complaining because I know folks in the Central Valley in California have not seen snow and have no water. And folks in New Mexico and Arizona and so on are probably like, well, I wish we had that. So I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. I am just saying that wish that it could be. It could have waited till January. It could even have waited till December. Last year, we didn't see snow until December. And all of a sudden now we have snow, dudes. Snow. Oh, like it started yesterday. And then, it flooded a little bit. But this morning it was full on. And now they're saying that because it snowed and then it gets cold, so the snow hardens, it becomes icy. And we've forgotten how to drive on these conditions, right? So there were multiple crashes on I-96 coming from Lansing this morning at 12 mile and 13 mile. People forgetting that you can't see it. It's black ice, people. Say black ice. You can't see it, but it's there. Because if it snowed and then it got cold, there's ice, so be careful. So as for me, I'm not on the freeways. I'm taking the mile roads and keeping my driving around certain areas, right? Incredible. Say incredible. So anyway, we're rolling and we're getting there, and daylight saving times I hate it. I think they need to stop it. It's a serious waste of time. Every year I have to go through this rhythm of setting my clock. So, the clock in my living room? The clock in my living room, I never change it all year. I can't be bothered. Who's gonna lift that clock down and go change it? No, I leave it. So it's been on Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight. It stays on it all day. It stays on it all year round. I kid you not, because by the time you change it, it's back again. I'm not into that fuss. I'm sick and tired of daylight savings time. I'm so tired of it. I wish they would pay some attention to it, right? Today on our show, I know I'm just kind of mouthing off because I really don't like the snow. But today on our show, we're going to talk about the commutation of sentences. And recently, as you know, Oklahoma decided, the governor of Oklahoma had campaigned on the promise that he would commute prison sentences of low-lying offenders. So nonviolent crimes and certain drug-based offenses, and certainly people for whom this was their first time in the system. And he lived up to that promise. Last Friday, they had a meeting at the prison board, and they read out the names of 526 individuals. So on Monday, en masse, 400 people walked out of prison, some of whom had been in jail for stuff like marijuana possession, some of whom had been in jail. This was their first time. And they walked out. Now, I've read the article. It didn't say anything about their record being expunged. But what he did say was that it was going to help them. So I imagine that there is some expungement that will take place later, some of whom, and he did, tell them that don't come back here. We don't want to see you back here. Right? And it makes me think that, isn't this something that the rest of the country should adopt? Like people who, as far as I'm concerned, right? And I am asking you, you are my listeners and my viewers, right? Don't you think that people who smoked weed, marijuana, don't you think that they shouldn't go to jail for that? Now, I'm not talking about the guy who is in his trailer out back cooking meth. He's a disaster waiting to happen. If you're going to seriously sit there and cook meth, you probably should do some time for that. You see what I mean? And don't tell me it's economics and Harry, you don't know how desperate people can get and so on. Baby, we've all been there. That doesn't mean I'm going to go cook meth in my garage or cook meth in my back room or in my basement or something. So I'm talking about people who perhaps smoked marijuana, probably sniffed some cocaine, and then they were caught, and now they're in jail. They have no priors. They've never been to jail before. And going to jail is a sentence, it's a life sentence. Because when you emerge from jail, you can't rent a house, you can't rent an apartment. Did you know you can't get certain types of loans? You can't get if it's drug-related offense, you can't get a student loan to go back to school, to go to college. If it's a drug-related offense, there's certain kinds of loans you can't get for cars. You can't get credit cards. You can't get certain kinds of prison sentences. You can't buy a house. You can't get a loan to buy a house. Obviously, in some places, you can't get a job. So recently here in Michigan, they started this movement to rid the box, to ban the box, the box on applications that says, do you have any prior criminal offenses? And I personally don't think you should ban the box. I think the box needs to stay there because there's some people who have not been rehabilitated. There's some kinds of crimes that are not rehabilitative. Let's just be clear. There are some people who have serious issues. People who are serial killers cannot be rehabilitated. People who are serial rapists cannot be rehabilitated. The only place that works for them is jail, right? There are people who murder people. I'm not talking about people who kill in self-defense because their husband was attacking them. I'm talking about people or their girlfriend was attacking them. I'm talking about people for whom this is a blood sport, right? So when you look at some of the sentences that people get for stuff like marijuana possession, you know, kids on a college campus are out having fun one night and they get pulled over and they get something called a minor in possession. Minor in possession of what? Alcohol. Minor in possession of a controlled substance. Minor in possession of drugs. Those are that ruined someone's life forever. Now they're expelled from campus, from college. They can't go anywhere. They can't work anywhere. Certain kinds of places, you can't work some places, right? I think we need to do an overhaul of what prison should be about. I think that's where there are too many people in prison. Did you know that the population of prisons is way too much? Oklahoma had the highest incarceration rate in the country. Then of course there's Mississippi and Louisiana, Arkansas, Bama, and Michigan, right? So what we have noticed over the years is that the places that have the highest incarceration rates have the highest prison population. So we need to look at what are people going to jail for? What is prison? That somebody educated me and told me jail is a different thing. Jail is county, right? Pulled over, don't have your documents or whatever, or some minor offenses. And then prison is federal, where you serve time based on the kind of how long you're going to be in prison for. If it's more than a year, that's a felony, right? Now, and I know it makes some of us very uncomfortable, especially for people of color, it's all too familiar because we almost can identify with someone who has spent time in jail. I used to think it was an anomaly. Seriously, my friends, seriously, don't judge me. I used to think it was an anomaly. I didn't realize how many people knew someone in jail around me until I started asking. I started asking questions and I found out people could say, well, my brother, my ex-boyfriend, my husband or my ex-husband, my uncle, my father, my son. You know what I mean? And it started to make me think. So I started asking questions. Well, what did they go to jail for? because I'm trying to understand, do we have a problem with prisons? Do we have a prison mentality in the society? Or are people seriously committing some dangerous crimes? So then I had to ask myself, well, what are people going to jail for? So you and I are driving down the road and you see somebody pulled over, right? Now, if there's an outstanding warrant for them, like recently, did you all see the story that happened somewhere in Michigan recently, where a woman did not return her library books? And she failed to understand how much that was a crime. So she was working and her boss was going to promote her and decided to do a background check. And when he did the background check, they found out that there was a warrant out for her arrest. So he notified her and she laughed it off. She said, "You gotta be kidding me. Is this a joke?" And he said, "No, seriously." When she went to check it out, because she hadn't returned the library book, there is a charge on the books for what? Theft of rental property. Hello? So guess what? She was locked. There was a warrant out for her arrest where she could actually serve time. Is that something that people should go to jail for, not returning library books? And you refer to that as theft of rental property? So if I go to the local library and I borrow a book, and knowing me, I'll intend to return the book and it sits in the back of my car for 4 weeks. When I lived in Southfield, seriously, I used to rent books like during winter. Man, I would go check out like 12 books because I'm a voracious reader. So I used to think about, days when it was snowy and you didn't get out. I just read books. This was before we had streaming services like Netflix. Tells a lot about the society or about me, right? And I would check out books, and sometimes I had a case that I had to cart them around in. And luckily for me, Southfield Public Library has something that you can just drop the book so you don't have to go in. That works for me because it could have been me who didn't return library books. And then there would have been a warrant issued because you didn't return. It's theft of rental property. Jesus, I need to go check this out if my kids have any library books. No, seriously. Do you see what I'm saying? Is that something that someone should go to jail for? I'm not hearing you all. Where are my people? I don't believe that. I believe there's some things that we're overtly criminalizing people for. I think we're criminalizing offenses that do not pose a threat to the safety and security of the public. That's my thing. Do you see what I'm saying? So somebody who is smoking weed all day, you're just smoking weed. I think you're crazy and stupid to be engaging in a behavior that nothing good is going to come out of that. What? You're just going to feel high. When you feel high, you do dangerous things, right? You might see things written on the walls that don't exist. So I don't believe that you should go to jail and spend your life in jail. And here's the thing with that. When you come out of prison, it's a life sentence. So they might give you 2 years, you come out in 1 year, but you're done. You might be physically free, but you're shackled to a system that now you are dispossessed and disenfranchised. You can't find work, you can't go back to school, right? You can't rent a place, you're condemned to living in poverty. I think we need to stop that part of it. Now, there has to be a distinction between how you go to jail. And I know that there's a movement nationwide to remove bail bonds, and I agree with that because I think a lot of poor people are in jail because they couldn't make bail. So they might have done something that got them pulled over, or they drunk at a bar and they had a barroom brawl, and people were drunk and stupid. When you get drunk, you act stupid, right? Seriously, you act funny and crazy. So the cops come, they take you down to county, but guess what? You can't post bail. So you end up sitting in the system and rotting away. We're overly criminalizing stuff. We probably need to revisit it and examine it. So when the Oklahoma governor, who is Republican, by the way, and I know it sounds surprising for a Republican governor to actually think this way, but you have to look in terms of, we've been talking all week about population. And you have to look after a while and step away from your own agenda, step away from your party politics, step away from your ethnic politics, step away from your own preconceived notions of how life should be for people, and look at the bigger picture. You're not an effective leader if you keep looking narrowly at this one group of people, this one block of the population. You're not being effective. We've seen that over and over again, right? And what happens is that when you look at the big picture and you start looking at it and you say, wow, this impacts so many people's lives. Because here's a girl who, and we won't even talk about the people who go to jail for mental health. Let's stick with the drugs for a minute. So here's a young woman, right? She's 21 or 22, smoked some weed and acted crazy, right? And she got pulled over. They found her with some weed. And guess what? She goes to jail. That's where that war on drugs thing came from. The war on drugs resulted in mass incarceration of people. And what it did was, after a while, you start to look at it. People come out of jail and they become habitual offenders because they can't subsist out here. They can't survive. It used to be that it only happened to people of color, especially Black and Hispanic people. Turns out, guess who this whole thing, it's a dragnet. Guess who it's affecting? Poor whites. So whites in rural communities, right? And those on the fringes of suburbs and rural communities, those whites who smoke their little meth, cook their meth back there, and smoke and drink and act funny and crazy and stupid, end up going to jail. And while they're in jail and they sober up, when they come out of jail, they can't work, they can't do nothing. So now what? Now you got to understand who I am. I'm not an advocate for the bad guy, right? I'm not an advocate for some gun-toting human being who thinks he needs to walk around with a gun to make him feel good and then go hurt people with guns. Those people need to go to jail. That's exactly the point I'm making. We need to make a distinction about what is a survivable offense. Meaning, if the person given enough time can survive this, then they don't need to serve time for that. Do you see what I'm saying? And who is it up to determine what is rehabilitative or not? Well, we have a dangerous set of precedents that some people who go to jail for sexual assault, for rape and murder, and people who go to jail for beating people up. You know, some people just get off on that stuff, right? People who like to rob banks and hold up business places with guns and shoot people at gas stations and so on. Those people need to do time. They're not rehabilitative. Why? They need to go somewhere where they sit down for years and think about what you have done and how you have hurt others and yourself. Those people need to do time, right? So now let's talk about people who go to jail for mental health offenses. You know those, you've seen those, right? What they did was they took mental health provisions out of budgets in the counties and states nationwide. So what happens now is that people who are bipolar or who suffer from some mental health disorder, we don't, as community members and as family members, we don't have any other recourse but to call the police. When the police come, what do the police do? They take them down to jail. So they end up serving time because at the time when they committed the offense, more than likely, they were not on their meds, or due to all the changes and revisions in the public healthcare system, they don't have access to their medications anymore. And those people end up serving time. So when they come out of jail, where are they going to go? Go back to family? Family is afraid of them. Do you see what I'm saying? We're criminalizing situations. And instead of criminalizing the act, we're criminalizing the person who does not need to be criminalized. Do you see what I'm saying? We need to revisit this. If Oklahoma can do this, California has done a tremendous job. California has led the nation in doing that. In California, for instance, they found out, I heard the story some years ago, they found out that people were going to jail for 20 years for writing a bad check. Who did they hurt? Are you going to get uptight and say that's a moral failing? What's wrong with you? Are you human? People were going to jail for 20 years for writing a bad check. and then coming out of jail and can't do anything. Some of those kinds of things people shouldn't go to jail for. Give them community service and then expunge it from their record. Are those the people who are likely to be habitual offenders? I think we need to look at the people who are most likely to commit dangerous crimes. I think that's what we need to figure out. That's what our smart thinking. And when I say smart, I'm not necessarily referring to being smart. I'm just saying our intellectual capacities should start looking at people and designing systems that will eliminate the truly dangerous, the dangerous from among us, and criminalize that, send those people away. The jails are filled with people who have committed low-level offenses. But for the grace of God, I've heard that over and over. Recently, I heard a woman who is an attorney, right? Now, she's white, upper middle class. So let me give you her demographics so you understand and put this into context. She's white, upper middle class. She's an officer of the court. She is a lawyer. Her son has committed numerous drug offenses. You know what she said? She said if she weren't her son would have been in jail. He's taking drugs much to her dissatisfaction, much to his own destruction, because he's still in his early 20s. He's going to grow up one day and become 30 and realize how much of his life has been damaged by drugs. This is what I'm saying. You see now what I'm saying. So when you look at it in the big picture, the person who is in their 20s and early 30s really have nothing to judge and base life on. They think that right now in the moment, that's life, right? They think that, oh, I can just do what I want to do, and what I'm doing right now is just what I want to do, and this is how I'll always feel. Just leave me alone. They have no clue that they're going to wake up one day and they'll be 35, want a better job, want to change their situation, want to change their circumstances, and won't have the ability to do it because they're hampered and shackled by a criminal record that cannot be displaced. So now you can't apply for a job, and so on. Right here in Detroit, I believe, I'm not going to say where because then that will give you some idea, but in Detroit, there's a homeless colony of young white people. Are you listening to me? Who range anywhere from 18 to the mid-30s. A homeless colony of white people whose family have literally abandoned them, right? And they are subject to being trafficked. In fact, there are people who probably have taken advantage of them. They are drug addicts. Most of them have prison sentences and prison records that cannot be erased. They've done time. When they come out of jail, their families want to have nothing to do with them. They end up being homeless. They have a whole colony. How they live through winters is something beyond my wildest imaginings. This was brought to my attention about 2 years ago. And it blew my natural born mind. I could not believe it. And what happens with them is that when I ask, well, what happened? What did they do? Did they kill anyone? No. Did they murder? No. They were mostly young people who took too much stuff up the nose, smoked too much, drank too much, ended up in jail with a prison sentence that has criminalized them. So now their families don't want to have nothing to do with them. Some of them, their families don't even know where they are. And they end up at the mercy of others. We are spending way too much resources criminalizing people. Now, I'm not talking about prisons for profit. People who run prisons just so they can make a profit off other people's discomfort. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that we need to examine who goes to jail, and under what conditions do you go to jail? That's what we need to talk about. We need to find out, who are these people? Why are we sending so many people to jail? Do you see what I'm saying? It used to be, I would say, it's not my problem. I don't have relatives like that, right? That's what I used to say. It's not my relative. Okay, it's not my problem. And then, guess what happened? I began to notice that it was taking place around me. It was people who had children. It was people whose brothers, people whose sisters, people whose friends, right? People whose nephews, uncles, and it started to make me think. Wow, maybe we are going overboard in criminalizing folks. You see what I mean? And so when you look at it, even people within the system will look at it, and there's some people who are really hardcore. There's some people for whom prison is the only place where they can be. There are people like that. Prison is the only place where you keep them there, and they can't interact with the public. This prison should not be a place for the mentally handicapped, for people who have mental health issues. They need to be institutionalized in a separate place where their mental disorder is treated. When my mother was alive, my mother used to tell me that so often. She worked at a local hospital, and she used to say that when they were taken into the hospital, within 24 hours, they would run back out on the street. She said sometimes they ran out with just the hospital gown on, running down the street. You know what I mean? Because as soon as they pump the drugs into them, and they get the drug that brings them back to some level of normalcy, they realize where they are, that they shouldn't be here. We probably are spending way too much. We really need to look at why Oklahoma has done this and model it in other places. Think of states that have high prison populations, like down in the South, right? You're Russian. Are you in Russia? I don't know what the situation is in Russia. I can't speak to it. I've never really done a study on prisons in Russia, right? But think of this. There's some states in the South, for instance, where incarceration rates are high because of poverty. So somebody is driving, he can't afford car insurance. He probably hasn't renewed his tags. He doesn't have enough money to renew his tags. Is that something people should go to jail for? Do you see what I'm saying? So he can't renew his tags, and he gets pulled over, and he goes to jail, and he can't make bail, and they languish in prison. A lot of women are in prison, not because they killed their boyfriends or slapped him upside the head, but they're in prison because they have mental health issues. And something happened and they snapped, as we would say. You've seen that show on TV, Snapped? Not cheaters, snapped. And they go to jail, and they don't know where they are, and they're not treated for it. Do you see what I'm saying? We really need to re-examine this. We probably need to look at how Oklahoma has done this, and it shouldn't be a stretch to think it can be modeled or emulated in any other state. California has done a tremendous job. There's a movement here in Michigan to do it. And I believe the president's office is looking into, has a special office within the presidential executive branch apparatus. He has appointed some folks to look into some of these issues that impact people. We really need to take a second look at it. Now, I'm not talking about, some people are saying, well, you know, if you've done the time and they're out, then you shouldn't run their criminal background check and so on. I am not comfortable with that because, like I said, there are some people whom I want to know who I am associated with. There are some people there's some crimes that I don't think are seriously rehabilitated. I have met people who perhaps went to jail 30, 40 years ago, and you'd never know. Right? They're the lucky ones, right? But there are some people whom you really, maybe. There's some crimes, for instance, that people just can't get past, like rape. People who have sex with children, those are proclivities. Do you see what I mean? Serial killers. Would you be comfortable with a serial killer being expunged? Not me. No. Somebody who has murdered, some crimes, you can say, well, it was a crime of passion. He killed his girlfriend. We're beginning to see that if they killed one girlfriend, they're likely to kill another one. So when you look at it, you're like, oh, experience shows that you probably need to stay in jail, bud. Right? But things like, oh, well, my friend was smoking and he picked me up.